Lord Byron is important to the Lincolns because you're probably aware Abraham was very fond of Shakespeare and of Robert Burns. Both of them were a little too earthy for Mary Lincoln's tastes. Mary preferred recent French novels, especially if there was a new opera in Paris or London or New York based on a new French novel, and she would go out and buy that and read it, sometimes in French. Lord Byron is the poet that they met over in the aesthetic sense. They liked Lord Byron equally well. And this is a touching and a wonderful example to have here because although it is an 1860 edition, Mary signed it 1868. And my suspicion, and we'll never know, but Robert, her oldest son, got married in September of 1868. Mary had been displaced by the new daughter-in-law, Mary Harlan Lincoln. She picked up and went to Europe for the next 3 years. I think she bought this book, used in 1868, to take it with her to Europe as a new memento of her husband. Here's a good Illinois story. The site of Mountain Hills Hall, where reception was held for Lincoln, president-elect. This was given to us 2 years ago by an antiques dealer in Pennsylvania. No, that's not right. An antiques dealer in Tennessee. We really had no idea where it would have come from. And I started looking into it, and it comes from Charleston, Illinois, where Mountain Hills Hall was the main gathering place for big speeches, for evening events, plays, concerts, speeches. And on the night that Lincoln went to say goodbye to his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln, January 31st of 1861, he said goodbye to her out at her farmhouse and then went into town and gave a speech there at Mountain Hills Hall. And that place was torn down a few years later, and on the very site was built the new offices of the newspaper in Charleston. And that sign was put up in the lobby of the newspaper office in Charleston until it was torn down in 1923, at which point the plaque took on a whole new life of its own and ended up in Tennessee for about 80 years, apparently, and then it came to us. This was another recent gift. There are 3 images here. You see S.A. Douglas, we know who he was, often overlooked, but certainly the most powerful political entity in Washington, D.C. during the 1850s. During a succession of 3 weak presidents, Douglas was the most influential senator, and he was not, strictly speaking, pro-slavery, but the issue of states' rights and whether states could choose to have slavery themselves did become his cause. Well, this emerges from the 1858 Senate race, Lincoln against Douglas, when he had by far the tightest political race of his career. And this was a handmade campaign banner that year by the Douglasites. 30 stars stitched into the field there, and the name stenciled twice down at the bottom. It was given to us by the Masonic Lodge here in Springfield just a few months ago. They had had it ever since it was made. Douglas was a 33rd degree Mason and pretty much won the Masonic vote in Illinois as a result. But we didn't know for sure when it had been made, except that you see now one clue. His name is there on the bottom twice. Here's the other clue. Here's the sign they had made a couple generations later. This flag was carried in the campaign of 1858 when Stephen A. Douglas ran for president. I think you're all saying that's not right if you've been here. How quickly we forget. The presidential campaign was in 1860. In 1858 was the Senate campaign, and if it had been the presidential campaign, that wouldn't have been Stephen Douglas's name twice on the bottom of the flag. It would have been his running mate on the right side, Herschel V. Johnson of Georgia. So the same thing happened with that lovely patriotic apron that is in the museum right now. The little girl's red, white, and blue handmade thing. That came to us in 1923 from the daughter of the little girl who had worn it originally, saying that she had worn it in the Lincoln-Douglas campaign of 1859. So we split the difference, and we're pretty sure it came from the Senate race. Here's an interesting story. That reads, "Further communications from the world of spirits." The voices of Joshua Solomon and others, and speaking on the rights of man. Published in New York in 1862. And it's a little faint to see it up at the top there. A. Lincoln. Mr. Lincoln did not sign that. He almost certainly did not ever read this book. There was a great vogue in forging Lincoln's name inside of books from his period back in the 1920s through 40s, and someone would have bought this, probably for a fair bit of money, and believed that Mr. Lincoln, like Mrs. Lincoln, was trying to communicate with the spirits from beyond. This at the point shortly after their son Willie had died in the White House in early 1862. We do know that Lincoln attended a couple of those seances, but we know too that he went in order to prevent Mary from getting hoodwinked or fooled or robbed. Really, there was some evidence of that going on at the time. Seances were a sort of a catch-can, fast buck operation, because there were so many people who had lost loved ones in the Civil War that there was a lot of this going on. And in fact, a good friend of Lincoln's, Noah Brooks, who was a reporter for the Sacramento newspaper, stationed in Washington during the war, went to one of these things, followed Mary there, and listened to this professor, what was his name? Professor Chichester, I think, talk about the spirit wrappings and the sounds and whatnot. And Noah Brooks went over and pulled back the dark curtain, just like in The Wizard of Oz, and saw this guy in the dimly lit corner and hit him in the head. Whereupon the seance came to a very abrupt end. And the next day, Brooks went back there to this guy's house, and he opened the door with a big bruise on his head and tried to deny that he had been the one who got hit. But that sort of put an end to it. So, forgeries and theoretical forgeries, all in one there. This is a sampling of forged Lincoln signatures. I think that the one we just saw on that book about spiritualism might be by, I've got my notes here, a guy named, there are two candidates, Eugene Field II, who was the son of a fairly famous writer and playwright, Eugene Field, in Chicago, who took to forging names inside of his father's old books and selling them for money. Or it was a guy more recently named Charles Weisberg, who I'm afraid was very good. Weisberg is numbers 3 and 4 here. There and there. They're fairly different, and that's one thing that made Weisberg pretty good. The top two are authentic Lincoln. We've got a legal case going to court in Florida next month. I and a couple of other people will be testifying by phone on a forgery of Lincoln's signature that someone lost a lot of money on and is trying to recover. And I think it's a Weisberg also. But there are other elements to the story that make it unusual.